Welcome everyone to our event Envisioning the Postwar. Really delighted to see such a great turnout. My name is Patrick Deere. I'm an associate professor of English at NYU, and you're in the English department building and event space. And we thank the English department for hosting us and in part co-sponsoring the event. I teach war literature and war culture from the late 19th century into the 20th century, right up to the present. And I'm working on a project called Surgeon Silence, Understanding America's Cultures of War. And I'm absolutely delighted to be the organizer of today's event and also the moderator. So Ross, did you want to come up and thank the co-sponsors briefly? Before I get on and introduce our distinguished and wonderful panel, I'd like to just introduce Ross Kapudi from the Islah Reparations Project, who it's really down to Ross that had the initial inspiration for this symposium. And Ross is very kindly just going to mention our co-sponsors and give some thanks to them.
Thank you all for coming. It's a very personal event for me because the subject matter touches on my life in many different ways. I'm a veteran of the Iraq War. I organize with many of the groups involved, and I want to thank all of you for coming, and I also want to thank the other co-sponsors. So our group, the group that I work most closely with, is the Islah Reparations Project, but the other groups involved are Iraq Veterans Against the War, the Center for Constitutional Rights, and also the Iraqi Transnational Collective. So big thanks to them for helping us put this together. And I'm really eager just to see what comes out of this conversation. So looking forward to your participation in the end.
Thank you. So I just had a couple of quick opening remarks. And as I mentioned, I'm the co-organizer of the NYU Cultures of War and the Postwar Research Collaborative, and we're co-sponsoring also. So I just wanted to say, and this is coming from me as a scholar of war literature going back over 150 years. Actually, I don't go back over 150 years, though it sounds like I do at this point because I have a little bit of a cold, for which I apologize. It strikes me that we're in a moment when the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, other ongoing wars in the global south, and their vast and brutal human, economic and societal costs, domestically and abroad, are sinking out of visibility. A sense of war fatigue, I think, is pervasive, though perhaps more in the civilian population than in other interested parties. Nevertheless, and I think we see it in this room this evening, organizers, veterans, scholars, like many citizens, are still working hard to confront these costs in the name of accountability, of finding a voice, learning what happened, taking responsibility, some measure of responsibility for these long and bloody conflicts. One major obstacle I've discovered in my own work is the lack of cohesive historical narratives in popular memory for the wars. You know, you only have to ask people, when did the Iraq war start? When did it end? The Afghanistan war, war in Afghanistan, when did that end? What happened? Have we been living in a war culture? If you're here then, you may be interested in countering or questioning the fragmentation, the blurriness of our own war culture, and challenging silences and taboos, which are often given the name the civilian-military divide, most often by vested interests who don't seem that interested in overcoming the civilian-military divide and really staging a proper ongoing dialogue, conversation. We see the celebration of veterans who are sacralized in our culture, but who are often in a situation of isolation and a tremendous burden of representation. Thank you for your service typically is a conversation stopper, not a conversation starter. And as for the voices of Iraqi and Afghan civilians, when do we get to hear them? So how do we do this crucial work? Well, I've mentioned, I think, fostering dialogue, finding spaces for local conversations, and keeping them going. Keeping them going is crucial. And one thing we're interested in doing is, finding some momentum from this event and keeping it going. And at the NYU Cultures of War group, we believe the university is one such crucial space. And it's very important to move beyond its very privileged confines. One very heartening tendency, and this is from the point of a literature professor, is the emergence of a really strong and vibrant body of contemporary war writing, much of which has come out of veteran writers' workshops and also work by civilian writers, Iraqi and Afghan writers, and from elsewhere in the global south. What I would suggest, what I would strongly argue as a scholar of war literature and war culture, is that we've got to avoid premature canonization. We need to avoid the promotion of what Raymond Williams called a selective tradition, deciding, okay, which voices count and which don't. Which have the prestige and which remain on the margins. We need to keep this emerging canon of war writing, and we're tremendously lucky to have one of the leading writers in this remarkable emergence of contemporary war writing, Sinan Antoon here. We need to keep this body of work as open as possible. Most crucial, as I've mentioned, is including the voices of Iraqi and Afghan writers, organizers, scholars. That involves literature in translation, which is only a very tiny proportion of the US publishing market. But there's real demand, there's hunger, I think. Also vital is to include the voices of organizers, of activists, in dialogue with veterans, civilians, scholars, and citizens, I think. That's the only way we can have a true movement towards a post-war, through local conversations like this one. So I'm really excited to see you here. I'm just going to now move into my moderation. So I'm going to introduce our panelists in turn. Carly Rubai is a PhD student in social anthropology, and she's a co-founder and director of the Islah Reparations Project with Ross Kapudi. Carly's research focuses on the ethics of war and violence and the impact of occupation and counterinsurgency on rural, if only, rural communities in Iraq. Actually, not if only. We'll leave the royals out of this thing, particularly with the Panama Papers emerging. It's not going to go well for the 0.1% at this point, I think, in Iraq and Palestine. In 2014 and 2015, Carly led several trips to bring reparation to refugee camps in Iraq. Next, we have Amna Al-Mukhtar, who is a co-founder of the Iraqi Transnational Collective. She's a graduate of Fordham University, where she double majored in international studies with a Middle East concentration and in philosophy, and she's completing a Master of Arts degree in Middle Eastern Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. She is also administrative and IT associate at the Center for Constitutional Rights, CCR, who we're delighted to be collaborating with this evening. Our third presenter will be Jose Vasquez, who is the former executive director of Iraq Veterans Against the War. He served 14 years in the US Army and was honorably discharged in 2007 as a conscientious objector. He's currently pursuing a PhD in cultural anthropology at the CUNY Graduate Center, conducting research on militarization and the politics of veteran status in contemporary American society. And he's also teaching at just up the road at John Jay College. Our fourth panelist is Sinan Antoon, who's an Iraqi poet, an award-winning novelist and translator, and an associate professor at the Gallatin School. Happy to say a friend and colleague here at New York University. Sinan's best-known works include The Corpse Washer, the Arabic title A Pomegranate Alone, Ijam, an Iraqi Rhapsody, and Ya Maryam. He's also a co-founder of the cultural and political e-zine Jadilaya, which is really worth checking out online. And lastly, we have Nadia Abu El-Haj, who is a professor of anthropology at Barnard College, who's at the end of the table there. Her forthcoming book, provisionally titled The Ethics of Trauma, Moral Injury, Combat, and U.S. Empire, examines the myriad forms and legacies of violence that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have unleashed, and how it is that so many of their attendant horrors remain hidden in plain sight. So if you could extend a round of applause to our panel.